All right, so let's talk about the big news of the day. Donald Trump was just acquitted for the second time. A second time historical, you could say. Many people are saying this was historical. This was the cover of CNN just a few minutes ago, and you can see acquitted again. And when I saw this, it sort of reminded me of that scene from Breaking Bad when he's like, he keeps getting away with this. How can he keep getting away with this? CNN, of course, is not happy about it. So McConnell was on the House floor just a few minutes ago. Donald Trump and their team, of course, reacted to the recent acquittal. We have Donald Trump's statement here, and it was kind of a doozy of a day. We woke up this morning thinking that it was going to be sort of procedural. Yesterday was the Trump and his defense team. They were wrapping up their arguments, and we sort of thought that they were done. The closing arguments had been finished. They were going to wake up today, have some final debate on some of the questions that were coming in yesterday, and it was going to be sort of a foregone conclusion that they were going to vote. And then there was a little bit of a fireworks going on this afternoon. And what happened was, I think the House managers over from the Democratic side, they wanted to call witnesses in. And so many of us were sort of scratching our heads saying, wait a minute, the trial is over. You already presented your case. You already had the opportunity to call witnesses. And you had agreed prior to the trial starting to not do that. That should have been something that was investigated or discussed prior to the start of trial. You can't just, after a trial has concluded, say, well, we didn't really like the evidence that we heard, so we're going to go out there and gather other evidence, right? Think about this in a criminal context. The government brings their case against somebody. They present their case in chief. They have their presentation. They stop. The defense presents. The government, you have open and closing arguments. The government can present some rebuttal witnesses. You have one set of closings. The defense closes again. The government closes again, but they're not reintroducing new witnesses. They're not presenting their case, waiting for the defense closing argument, and then saying, Judge, hey, before we wrap this up, before the jury goes and votes, we have all of this other evidence we want to just bring in. We forgot to call that guy, forgot to call this guy. No, that's it. That's the end of the game, right? You have one trial. You get to bring your case, bring your A game, or don't bring it at all, and don't bring criminal charges. In this case, these were impeachment charges, but they were largely, I think, in my opinion, analogous to a criminal proceeding. So they kind of botched all of that. CNN says acquitted again. Washington Post, very much the same. A lot of, I think, Democrats are very disappointed today. A lot of Trump Republicans or, the MAGA movement, they're very happy about this today. And so let's break it down just a little bit before we dive into the digital Bill of Rights. All right. So who voted to convict Donald Trump? Of course, all the Democrats did. And then we have, it looks like Richard Burr. These are 7 Republicans. The total vote was 57 to 43. So, of course, you need 2/3 in order to convict a president, sitting or former president. And they didn't get that. They were 57 to 43, which is actually a little bit closer than I thought it might be. I thought it was going to be. What I mean is closer to impeachment. I thought that number might be around 55 to 45-ish, and nope, it was a little bit higher than that. So Richard Burr, Susan Collins, I think was pretty much a foregone conclusion. Same with Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, Ben Sass. All of them, I think, had already indicated that they were going to be voting this way. Richard Burr, I think, was a surprise to some people, as was Bill Cassidy and Pat Toomey, but it was 57 to 43, so 7 Republicans flopped over. You can guarantee that they are going to be facing primaries in their next campaigns, but many of them just got recently elected. So like Ben Sass, for example, he's got another 6 years for people to cool down, or 5.5 years until people cool down about this particular vote. And after that point in time, maybe people have forgotten about Donald Trump, or maybe he's back in the White House again. Who the heck knows? Well, it is probably not going to be over there. So as soon as this was done and over, Mitch McConnell, who voted to acquit the former president, came back out on the Senate floor and apparently was hinting that he would be supportive of criminal charges now moving forward against Donald Trump. And so here's what he said. He said, or according to Marianne McKinney, she's a journalist, says, seems McConnell is calling for Trump's criminal prosecution. And she quotes him just from the floor, says, President Trump is still liable for everything he did while in office as an ordinary citizen. He didn't get away with anything, yet we have a criminal justice system in this country. So, and she says that's a Pontius Pilate move. So, this is something that the same point that I've been making here for a long period of time. When people were saying that there's this January exception that any president in the final month of their term in office in January can suddenly commit all of these crimes and just get away with it. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, what? We have a Justice Department. Do you not understand that? They could prosecute them. They could bring criminal charges against them if there was enough there. And so now we've got Mitch McConnell out there hinting theoretically that, well, maybe they're going to prosecute Trump and it's the Biden DOJ now. Maybe that sounds pretty attractive to them. And so this is the first sign of a massive rift out there in the party. We all saw this coming. For a long time, I said, I feel sort of like the Republican Party is kind of dead in the water. There's this massive division, sort of a Trumpian contingent, Trumpian demographic. And then on the other side, you've got the mainstream sort of establishment politicians like the Mitch McConnells. Mitch McConnell comes out, says, well, we kind of support criminal prosecution. Donald Trump Jr. comes back out and says, if only McConnell was so righteous as the Democrats trampled Trump and the Republicans while pushing the Russian collusion BS for 3 years, or while Dems incited 10 months of violence, arson, and rioting. Yeah, then he just sat back and did jack S. So he's not happy about it. And I think that it's just going to continue this rift between the two sides. This was not particularly good for the GOP as a party. I think that a lot of the Republican senators are going to be on their heels for a foreseeable amount of time as a result of their votes to convict Donald Trump. It was symbolic, right? Didn't do anything. And they're going to have to, deal with that in the next primaries. Some of them are going to be facing consequences. Other of them will not, right? I think Murkowski, Collins, Romney, they're all very safe. They were voting their conscience. That's fine. But some of the other senators, they may be on their heels in the foreseeable future. So we'll see. Now, Donald Trump came out. His statement is as follows. I want to first thank my team of dedicated lawyers and others for their tireless work upholding justice and defending the truth. My deepest thanks as well to the United States senators and members of Congress who stood proudly for the Constitution we all revere and the sacred legal principles at the heart of our country. Our cherished constitutional republic was founded on the impartial rule of law, the indispensable safeguard for our liberties, our rights, and our freedoms. He says it is a sad commentary on our times that one political party in America is given free press to denigrate the rule of law, defame law enforcement, cheer mobs, excuse rioters, transform justice into a tool of political vengeance, and persecute, blacklist, cancel, and suppress all people and viewpoints with whom or which they disagree. I have always and always will be a champion for the unwavering rule of law, the heroes of law enforcement, and the right of Americans to peacefully and honorably debate the issues of the day without malice and without hate. This has been another phase of the greatest witch hunt in the history of our country. No president has ever gone through anything like it. It continues to be because our opponents cannot forget the almost 75 million. So now we're getting into some dangerous territory for YouTube. So we got to be careful here. He says, I want to convey my gratitude to the millions of decent, hardworking, law-abiding, God and country-loving citizens who have bravely supported the important principles in these very difficult, challenging times. We have a historic movement with the Make America Great Again movement. In the months ahead, I have so much to share with you. We have so much to do ahead of us. We'll emerge with a vision for bright, radiant, limitless American future. Together, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. We remain one people. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. So, generally, a pretty benign statement, right? Not much there. He says, I thought he was going to get into some of the voter fraud stuff, but he's not. He said 75 million people who voted for us just a few months ago. We cannot forget about them. So that was kind of the sentence that I gleaned over. And, I think it's a pretty benign statement. I don't know what YouTube's going to do with this type of stuff, if they're going to just start canceling people for reading his statement. So we got to be careful about that. I know nobody likes that we have to do that, but we got to do it. So generally, overall reaction, I thought, I was kind of in and out of it today, this morning. I think largely speaking, Van der Veen was very good. I thought that his performance today in his closing argument was pretty passionate, and it was well done. He actually was weaving in a lot of the same issues that we talked about. Typically, what I would like to do is give the Democrats, a thumbs up or give them some sort of a compliment today. But I think that they botched it largely. I mean, and that was unfortunate for their side. What we saw today was there was a rush to get witnesses in. They were going to sort of, as this was coming to a close, there was this big movement. And I think they actually had the votes where they were going to be able to call witnesses. And I think 5 or 6 Republican senators joined in on them. It was like 55 to 45 or 56 to 44, whatever it was. And they were going to be moving forward to call witnesses. And a lot of people on the Republican side were up in arms about this over on Twitter. They were sort of, their fireworks going off. I can't believe this is happening. And then Van der Veen came back out and he was scolding the other side saying, okay, that's fine. We're going to have to haul these people back to my office. And he was getting a little bit of grief for that on Twitter. We're going to have to, deposition all these people. And then at some point, one of Trump's lawyers or somebody who was working with his team, they came back out and they said, we've got hundreds of people that are on our witness list. Everybody that the Democrats played in all of their videos, we want depositions. We want Nancy Pelosi. We want Hillary Clinton. We want Mayor Bowser from D.C. We want everybody. And so the list just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then they reached an agreement miraculously. Suddenly now the Democrats who were wanting these witnesses suddenly entered into this agreement where they basically got one written statement from the Republicans submitted into evidence. And it was for something that, turned out to be irrelevant because he got acquitted. So on Twitter, a lot of the Democrats were very angry about that. And you're sort of seeing a rift over there as well. I think David Axelrod was on Twitter talking about don't blame the Democrats, or okay, don't melt down over here because of what happened. This was a negotiated deal. This is the best thing that we could do. We got some evidence in that we would not have otherwise gotten in, and so don't lose your cool over this. And they proceeded to do that anyways. Very upset about it, saying this was such a damage to democracy and hurting America and all of those different comments. So a little bit of a rift happening over there, but I don't think that is something that is going to be matching the problems that the Republican have. Trump, I think he's still a threat moving forward. Obviously, this is, I think, what the Democrats were trying to alleviate. And I mean threat, however you want to interpret that word. The Democrats think he's a threat to democracy. They think he's a threat to America. They think he's probably a threat to physical safety in this country. And they're very concerned about that. I think he is still a threat. If you are on that side of the aisle, you're going to use that word and say, well, that was a bad thing. Right? It's a horrible thing. If you're a Republican, you're saying this is great, right? Because Donald Trump was not responsible for the incitement. He was not responsible for the insurrection. He was out there talking about a legitimate issue that many Americans also feel have they also have problems with them. And he is the only person talking about it. And so if that leader of that contingency of the country is sort of emasculated, right, has their ability to be effective removed from them, then that the rest of that movement might just die. It might just sort of peter out. And I think that's kind of what the whole point of this impeachment was. That was kind of the goal of it. So now that hasn't happened, Trump still has, whether he decides to run in 2024 or not, he still has the ability to do that. And that gives him some power, some leverage moving forward into future discussions. I already read that Lindsey Graham was going to be meeting with him, and they're going to be talking about the future of the GOP. Trump is now a player at that game. If he had been convicted and removed and not allowed to run again, he can't be removed. He's already been removed. If he had been precluded from running again, then that would have sort of removed his leverage from that equation. And I think he wouldn't have been invited to be a party to that conversation. So he's still a threat either way, whatever side of the aisle you're on. He is somebody who is still going to be effective and very relevant in American politics for the foreseeable future, whether or not he runs again. And there are a lot of people out there saying that'll never happen. His political capital is blown. I do not think that at all, folks. I do not think so. I mean, if this comes back in 4 years from now and you're talking about a Mitt Romney versus a Donald Trump in a Republican primary, or a Ben Sasse versus a Donald Trump again, in a general, he might lose, but in a primary, I'm not so sure. People are pretty disaffected with the Republican Party. And I think for very good reason. And then lastly, the last point I wanted to make is this talk of criminal charges is just bananas. The fact that Mitch McConnell is hinting at that, I just think is ridiculous. And we've gone through enough of that in the last couple days, the last week or so, to detail what happened there. We talked about incitement. We talked about the Brandenburg test. We ran through some of the case law to talk about free speech. We talked about all the problems with causation, proximate cause, superseding, intervening causes, a lot of issues. And I don't think that any of this stuff would have been admissible or even prosecuted in a court of law in a criminal proceeding. We'll see if that happens now, though, right? There may be prosecutors or U.S. attorneys around the country. We're already seeing that they are very excited about prosecuting Donald Trump. We've got, I think, Letitia James out of New York. We've also got, there's another newly elected Democrat out of Georgia who's leading an investigation against Donald Trump over that Raffensperger phone call. And I think those are state level. Those are attorney generals and attorneys general and their state level officials. But we may see somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the Department of Justice, now that there's the Biden White House in charge of it, that wants to take this up and move forward with it. But I just don't think from a criminal standard that it would meet the threshold in order to move the case forward. So